Mark Driscoll says that it's possible Jesus could have rebelled against God, that is, sinned against God. Apparently, God could have rebelled against God. Thus, Driscoll writes, quote, "Could Jesus have sinned? While systematic theologians have spilled much ink on this point, the precise biblical answer is that we do not know. The Bible never addresses, much less answers the question. Some will find this disturbing. The Bible is clear that humility is the first requirement for a good theologian, so that we can be satisfied with what the God of the universe thinks we need to know." It's taken from page 52 of his book, Vintage Jesus, that came out this year. And here's my response. Driscoll sounds agnostic about predestination. You'll probably hear him saying things like, quote, "Perhaps Christ could have been a sinner, perhaps not. God doesn't seem to have predestined or decided anything." That seems to be Driscoll's view. Or does Driscoll stop here? In a sermon called "How Human Was Jesus?", Driscoll goes further. Here he says that Jesus lusted after women and wanted to sleep with his female disciples. Yeah, this is a Mark Driscoll quote from a sermon entitled "How Human Was Jesus?" And as I was saying, it seems like Jesus was less righteous than Adam was before Adam sinned, because it never says that Adam was lusting after women, desiring to have sexual relations with women. But apparently Driscoll thinks Christ was desiring to sleep with women. So Adam was lonely, but Christ was a pervert, according to Driscoll. And
he goes on to say, "But we have one who has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin." Jesus never did sin, but he really was tempted. You say, yeah, but he wasn't tempted like me. He was tempted in every way as we are. You want to eat too much and be a glutton. You want to drink too much and be a drunkard. You want to take something that's not yours and be a thief. You want to convolute the truth and be a liar. You want to be a self-righteous, religious, pharisaical hypocrite who is judgmental of all people and kind to very few other than the few that are like you. If you're filled with pride and arrogance, which is the original sin, and got Satan kicked out of heaven, if you're tempted to these sorts of things, including sexual sin, some of you say, "Now, Mark, Jesus wasn't sexually tempted." Well, of course he was. 30-something-year-old single man who had women who adored him. You don't think he ever wanted the comfort of a woman? You don't think he ever got tired of going to bed by himself? You don't think that he didn't once want to have intimate relations with a woman? He was tempted. And you need to distinguish between temptation and sin. They're two totally different things. If you don't get this distinction, Satan will absolutely destroy your conscience. Temptation is where we are presented with an opportunity to sin. Sin is when we act on it.
So the key point, the key part of the quote is where Driscoll says, you don't think Jesus, a 30-year-old single male, didn't get lonely and didn't sometimes want to have sexual relations with women. And the discussion is between me, Andrew Bain, and Monty Collier, aka Kingsport Calvinist, and Monty's just going to plug his mic back in, and we're going to discuss the implications of what Driscoll's saying. It seems like Driscoll's making Christ into a pervert who wasn't just tempted, but apparently succumbed to the temptations and desired things contrary to the law of God. Any thoughts, Monty?
Yep, I'm from Kingsport, Tennessee, Brian. About 90 minutes from you. Hey, Andrew, man, that's really disturbing that he really believes that Christ had a desire. He had the sinful desires. There's no way you can condone that. That's evil.
Right. And I'm just going to quickly quote Brian, Brian supports Driscoll, and he thinks that Driscoll's not saying that. And this is what Brian wrote on my Facebook in defense of Driscoll. He says, Driscoll never says Jesus lusted. Driscoll says Jesus was tempted to lust. Jesus was also tempted to abort his mission by making bread from stones, while he fasted in the desert, to worship Satan to gain earthly kingdoms, and to jump off the temple to prove he was God. Jesus didn't do these things because he was God. He also didn't lust because he is God. But no temptation is different than any other. If Jesus was a man with a body, he had a biological sex drive. The fact is, a biological sex drive isn't evil. You okay, Monty? What most people often do with the sex drive is evil. And I think Monty said we wanted Brian to define biological sex drive for us. To say that Jesus had a sex drive, Brian, how would you define sex drive? Do you think that's a desire to sleep with women? And if so, doesn't Matthew chapter 5 say that, I'll quote it directly, word for word, that if you look at a woman lustfully, okay, verse 27, you have heard it said in the ancients, do not commit adultery. And he's quoting Exodus and Deuteronomy, and then Jesus says, but I say to you, everyone looking to a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her. Monty, would you agree that that's clearly teaching that if Jesus wanted to sleep with women, then he was committing adultery with them?
If he desires to have sex with any woman that's not his wife, it's a sin. And by desire, I'm defining it as want, the will. So, I mean, he wasn't married, obviously. So I don't believe he had any desire to sleep with any woman. I noticed one gospel, you're up here, are you appealing to mystery, to a Clarkian? You're surely not appealing to mystery up here, but is it mysterious? I mean, what do you mean by that?
One gospel says, what about Hebrews 4:15? Jesus was in all points tempted as we are. It is a mystery to me, but Jesus could not sin, that's impossible. But it is a sin to lust in your heart. Could he have not got the idea from Satan? I don't want to be dangerous and say he had the desire. I'm interested, Brian, would you say that Jesus had the desire to sleep with women who were not his wife? And I'm just going to quickly quote a psalm while we're at it that seems to say that Jesus always meditated. Psalm 16 verse 8. I have set Jehovah always before me, for he is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. And that's quoted in Acts 2:25 to be about Christ. For David says, as to Christ, I always foresaw the Lord before me, because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Monty, guys, Brian, one gospel, isn't this saying that Jesus had God always before him? How could he be lusting after women if he always had God before him? Brian says, I don't have it worked out. Whatever level of desire that would imply, he resisted that.
Well, see, I mean, Brian, I don't know why you want to
get
into the level of desire.
We're not too... Sorry.
Yeah, level of desire doesn't help the matter.
Sorry,
level of desire doesn't help the matter. But if you mean by desire that you want to do something, then that's going to have to be, forbidden. Christ didn't have a desire to sin. But you might mean some type of feeling. I don't know, but that desire there has to be defined too.
Right. And I'm just going to quote a bit more Driscoll. He says in a chapter entitled, Could Jesus Have Sinned? While systematic theologians have spilled much ink on this point, the precise biblical answer is that we do not know. The Bible never addresses, much less answers, the question. Some will find this disturbing, but the Bible is clear that humility is the first requirement for a good theologian, so that we can be satisfied with what the God of the universe thinks we need to know. Now, this seems to be the whole paradox, submit your mind, don't even think through the implications of the things you're saying kind of position, it seems like Christ would rebuke Driscoll for this position. If you recall, Christ says to the Sadducees, God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he deduces from this that the resurrection is true. So he uses logic to prove his point. Now, if we use logic on Driscoll's position, saying that Jesus could have sinned is like saying that God could rebel against himself. Would you agree that that's the implication of what Driscoll's saying?